Hello and welcome to the J+R Movie Podcast. On today's episode, we are going to be discussing Memento. It follows its main character, Leonard, is basically this guy who recently has gained this condition called antegrade amnesia, where he can't remember anything after a couple of minutes, and as a result he has to constantly remind himself through tattoos and Polaroid cameras and stuff like that. And the film basically follows his quest for revenge against the man who killed his wife. What's notable about that is that we see the story take place in reverse order. The film begins with him seemingly having killed his target, and then we basically retrace our steps and find out how he did that, who the target Teddy really is as a person, and also by the end of it, basically the thing that started this whole story to begin with.
I think this is one of Christopher Nolan's best films. I really love this film.
And all of them are great.
Yeah, no, yeah, I don't mean it like it's a bad film, but even amongst that, I still think it's one of his best. I think it's perhaps his best use of structure. Really love the way that this film is structured and the way it kind of plays with the antegrade amnesia concept and just layers a really effective mystery. It feels like a great neo-noir to me, and I think that's one of the reasons it works so well.
So I really like it as well. It's for me, I mean, it's the kind that is most rewarding upon multiple viewings. And I have seen this film multiple times, but I think that this film is only truly rewarding once you've not only seen it all the way through, but seen it again. Because then once you've seen it again, kind of have an idea of where the story is going from the beginning, and it then recontextualizes a lot of the film as well. Because first viewing and second viewing are very, very different experiences based on what you know.
They are, but to be fair, I found the film plenty rewarding the first time round. The second viewing is a completely different experience, but I think it works in both viewings quite well.
It's not like the kind of film where you have to watch it to enjoy it, but it is best when you watch the film again and you kind of know how it ends, essentially, or how it begins.
It is this weird blend of hopefulness and nihilism that I love. I think it's a real neo-noir thing. You get a protagonist who's got this weird sense of hope. I think they do it a lot of thrillers now as well. Nightcrawler, for instance, has got the same thing. The main character's got this very, very hopeful outlook. The film overall is very, very nihilistic because the main character is an absolute prick.
Basically, the narrative of Memento, if you take away the non-linear structure, the entire point of it is almost like a study of grief, essentially. It's basically about a guy who cannot move on from his wife's death, especially given what is heavily hinted at and almost revealed at the end. You realize that he has a very, very good reason to not remember that. And it's about him not wanting to avoid responsibility and also not wanting to come to terms with it. It's about him essentially setting himself on this path because he doesn't want to confront the truth. And that truth gets revealed at the end of the film. The final reveal is up there with Usual Suspects or Fight Club or Sixth Sense in terms of
I completely agree.
movies. I think literally the only reason why it's not as famous as those is just because there's still an element of, well, is this the truth? See everything that Teddy says at the end as being 100% true.
Okay.
What do you think?
I think there's a lot of truth to it. I think Leonard definitely killed multiple people who he just convinced himself were his wife's killers with the tattoos. Whether they had quite the relationship that he said they did is a little different for me. I'm not 100%. I feel like Teddy definitely manipulated that situation to get ridof that he didn't like.
People that wouldn't be missed anyway, like a drug dealer or something like that, or even Teddy himself at the end. What I think works about the film mainly is that structure. I think what's so great about the film is that it kind of has a rhythm. It has a very consistent rhythm, and it's a rhythm that never gets boring at all, because it's it never gets boring because there's always something different happening in each scene, even in the black and white cutaways that we get where we're seeing, him in the motel room. Even in that instance, it's we're learning something new every time, and that's because he's telling the Sammy Jankis story, and we're going through it and we're learning more about it. We're learning more about this guy. And later on, it turns out that the Sammy Jankis story is basically Leonard's own story that he's just kind of pretended is the story of somebody else.
Transposes his story. onto this other person, so he doesn't have to identify with what he actually is, how he actually is, because he accidentally killed his wife. That very likely did. That's quite a hard thing to live with.
Because of his condition, it then means that essentially his mind can choose not to live with it. But
exactly what it did.
So when you analyze it, and you analyze the fact that again, Teddy, like Teddy, all throughout the film, is kind of Leonard's basically like as manipulative as he is, he's probably his only friend as well by the end of it. And then when you take the actual ending, which is the beginning, into account, Leonard, on the one hand, breaking this cycle, but on the other hand, just continuing to perpetuate it, and also maybe putting himself in a worse position.
Yeah, because this time he doesn't have all the help to help him, remember who he is. It's almost, in a way, killing Teddy is almost like a suicide. If you think about it, because there's no way that he'll remember half the stuff that he needs to, especially with the limited memory that he's got.
I'm not sure how it's going to function. Like the only way it could is if maybe he wrote down that this was the guy, and if that was the final kill, and he wrote down that that was John G, and you somehow managed to remember it, even though it's not true. Like, that's the only way that could be a breaking of the cycle. You do get the sense that it's an endless cycle, but at the same time, though, at the end of the film, you have that entire exchange about how when they killed the real guy, Teddy was so convinced that Leonard would remember that he didn't remember it. So a part of me just wonders, is Leonard going to remember this kill? The ending of the film, it poses a lot of questions, and it kind of leaves a lot of stuff up to interpretation. But at the same time, it also gives you a lot of answers. It reveals a lot to you. But at the same time, you're also asking plenty of questions,
But it still wraps things up. It satisfies you. And I think it's an absolute standout of the writing and the direction. It's the way it's directed. All the performances feel real. Like, they feel very, very real, which I adore about the film. I completely buy the concept, which is great. It shows you just enough. And this is more the writing, because I feel like with Nolan, you really got to talk about writing it and directing, because they're so linked with a Nolan film. I genuinely believe it's mostly directed from the script, from his films. Like, so the same. Don't get me wrong, there's so much visual stuff, and I'm not downplaying that at all. But because plot is so important to a Christopher Nolan film, I would say it's the most important thing. Plot and structure, then the writing and the direction become the same thing by the end of the day.
Watching this movie again, I was struck by how well edited it was, because it's very. I mean, first of all, obviously, like the transition between black and white and the color scenes, you don't realize it, but you're actually watching like two different chronologies play out.
It's past and present going in the wrong directions each way, because the past is progressive, but the present is almost regressive. But it's all sort of same sort of era. So you've got two eras really going at once, and not counting the Sammy story, which is kind of being told during the past sequences. So
yeah,
really count. But you've got two major periods which start. It's trying to work out what's going on with him, and then you get Teddy kind of operating in how he presumably has been for quite a while.
You're talking about the phone calls.
Yeah.
And that is quite cleverly done, because it's not directly revealed that he was the guy on the phone, but it kind of is at the same time. You find out that he was the guy on the phone, but he doesn't come out and say, I'm the guy on the phone.
I think one thing that I want to talk about as well, just to do with the colour, because I really love the fact that they separated it in black and white versus colour. It separates them so clearly that when they start fusing together, come to a linchpin around the sequence where Leonard kills Jimmy. You see that sequence both in flashes of black and white and in colour. So it shows that they're coming together to a fusion point. His past, his present, it's all coming to the same point.
Final 18 minutes are kind of like a loop that joins both timelines, a loop that joins the previously separate timelines. It's a kind of film that's like very, very unpredictable in that sense. You're watching the black and white stuff, you're like, okay, when is this? Like what does this have to do with anything? Like, it feels kind of random when you're first watching it, but then once you have that later on knowledge, you're like, okay, I get it. It's almost like we're watching like a prologue that is kind of split up between scenes, basically. What's even more notable about it is that it's kind of, on the one hand, given how we know basically that the Sammy Jankis story is Leonard's own story, it's almost like we're kind of getting exposition about Leonard himself, but in a way that we didn't even know we were getting it, because we're getting stuff about Leonard himself, but just with a different person taking his place.
It also kind of reveals character by doing it that way, because it forces like Leonard looking objectively at himself, giving his own opinion about himself.
Giving his opinion on somebody different. The way that I see it more like is I see it more like he's kind of, it's like he is assessing his own situation from a third person perspective. It said that Leonard worked in insurance. Maybe it could have just been a random insurance agent that he was just casting himself as. I think he was casting himself in both roles, or he was casting Sammy in his role, and he was casting himself in the role that he would normally have. Kind of a mixture, because the Sammy story did happen, but based on what Teddy says, it didn't happen the way that it happened. The way that it happened was Sammy was just faking it, you know. You're kind of getting these like differing perspectives, and it's definitely a film that gets a lot better once you like think about it and analyze it, because when you analyze it, you kind of see like, oh, there's an entire web of stories being told in this one film, yet it does it without feeling convoluted or anything. It encourages you to properly think about like what's going on as well. It even manages to, it does the thing that you're normally not supposed to do in writing, opening with a spoiler.
I really like what it does, because it knows, you almost know you're building to something, and you know you're building something, and you think oh cool, we're going to learn how this guy murders this guy, and you do, but it adds like 2 extra layers to it. You're like, okay, cool, so we'll see how he figures it out, we'll see how he does the mystery, and we do see that, but then it reveals the mystery is absolute rubbish, and really being revealed is that Teddy's a bit of a scumbag, and he's been manipulating Leonard the whole time, and Leonard himself is a scumbag and a horrific murderer by this point.
Yeah, I know.
And we don't even know if the guy's particularly guilty, which is a great moral ambiguity to kind of end the film on. And then it adds to the absolute, not quite horror, but almost horror of the ending, which is where Leonard, knowing this full well at this point with his memory, decides that he's not going to note it down and goes, nope, I'm going to reset, and I'm going to keep finding these guys.
You as well. And it's unspoken, but it's almost like, I mean, partially because he now knows that Teddy is a John G, but especially when he writes down, don't believe his lies, it's like he's rejecting the truth that Teddy gave to him. And he's rejecting the actual truth, especially if you believe that Teddy is telling the truth. You know, if you believe that Teddy's telling the truth, then it's not only that he's rejecting Teddy, it's that he's rejecting reality. So you were talking about the color as well. I want to talk as well about a bit more about the editing, actually, and how, like, I noticed, and this is kind of a trademark among his films, but I noticed that there were a lot of like cut-ins as well. Cut to a person holding an object, cut from a faraway shot to a close-up, or cut from a mid-shot to a close-up. A lot of that stuff, and I think that that's probably maybe the most appropriate usage of that I've seen in a film, because it fits with the character's mind, because he's all obsessed with like details. You know, he's all obsessed not only with the stuff on his body, but also the photos and all of that. It's almost like you're in his mind, and we're kind of seeing that
I think what the edit really does well, and it's the whole narrative really brings you into his mind, because the film's structured like you're inside his mind. The edit brings you like he's inside his mind. The cinematography is all fragments. Shots, they last, but then you'll get a few that are just very, very quick, and they're just kind of put together. You see flashes, and you don't ever quite get a full picture of what's going on. You don't ever get quite comfortable with the space.
To give you an example as well, there are other scenes. I don't know if this is a common trick in like movies. I think sometimes it is, but you see a scene playing out, some of it is cut, and he's going outside and starting that fire, and when he's like burning his wife's things, it's like you see him like picking up wood, and then you just see him sitting in front of the fire. Like you don't see him make the fire. And obviously that's like sometimes that stuff is done because it would be kind of boring just to watch 2 minutes of him like starting the fire or whatever. But I kind of like how it's like we're going immediately from somebody starting to do something and then them doing it, you know, or even a few other scenes are like that, or kind of edited like that. And I quite like that style of editing.
Yeah, I agree. It keeps pace going just in anything, and it keeps things, you're not waiting around too long, and the mundanity doesn't quite work, so it gives it a filmic reality rather than reality. But I think in this film especially as well, it uses that trick to make you feel like in a normal film, you're jumping a certain amount of time, but you could actually be jumping like a good 2 years. It's never quite clear how far you're jumping and how long you're going and where exactly you are. Just like he's not. And because of that, it really adds to the effect of, for example, like when he suddenly wakes up and realizes he's got a guy in the cupboard. He's like, why the hell have I got a guy in the cupboard? Things like that. Or when he's running and he's like, oh, I'm chasing this guy down. And then it's like, oh no, wait, he's chasing me. Shit.
I agree with you in the sense that it's kind of saying like the fact that we only know as much as he knows means that we're as confused as he is in certain moments, like the ones that you just brought up, or even the bit where he's like coming in and saying, "Who the fuck is Dodge?" You know, it's like we don't know who that guy is, and neither does Leonard. You know, so therefore we're in the same position as him. But in terms of like the time stuff, I mean, the black and white stuff does seem like it could take place at any point in time, and it's not until the end where you realize that it's only like it's kind of hard to work out. But I think the events of the film take place across like 2 days, maybe.
I'm not so sure. I don't think the black and white stuff and the color stuff happens in 2 days.
I felt the black and white stuff was all in real time, but maybe it wasn't. It might not have been.
I just don't think it was 2 days.
Music as well. Really love the music. I love how each of his films has its own like kind of distinct theme, and this one has a really really memorable track. It's not like the kind that you'd expect to hear in like a thriller, but it's the kind that it clouds your mind with like feelings of existentialism. It's very much a track that conveys tragedy, but there's also, when it needs to, it gets very, very intense. Like in select scenes, the soundtrack gets very intense, but in other scenes, it's this very melancholic theme that they play all throughout the film.
I think the score is really, really nice because it's understated. There's nothing grand, it's nothing big. There is this slow melancholy as you realise the situation is obviously bad, and it doesn't try and convince you that it's really gonna get better. It just is a fact, and Leonard eventually resigns himself to that fact and almost owns it. But even then, the score is still this melancholic thing to just kind of indicate the tragedy of what the film is. The film is a very, very tragic film, and especially Leonard's story.
I think we should get onto the characters and the performances. I mean, first of all, I think that this is like it's probably my favorite performances of each of these actors' careers.
Yeah, Guy Pearce is amazing in this.
At first, I was kind of struck by the fact that he was playing such a nervous, socially inept person. Upon reflection, I thought to myself, he's also kind of playing a bit of a sociopath as well, because he kind of has this like slight flatness to his voice, and sometimes that doesn't change even when he's like being intimidating, but you can kind of understand it because it's almost like he's subconsciously used to the idea of murder.
It's almost like he's primed for it, like his behaviour. It's almost like a learned behaviour for him, like an instinctual behaviour at this point.
Mm-hmm. You can imagine that the murder of the first John G was a lot more violent than the murder of, Jimmy. When he needs to like get violent and threatening, he does that really, really convincing. Like it's great all throughout the film in several different sequences. Like several sequences that ask for like sadness. He conveys that really well. In certain monologues he does that really well. And in some scenes where he has to be threatening, like in like the bit that sticks out to me the most, I think, is the bit that is kind of the climax of the film, like the bit at the end, where he thinks that Jimmy is the John G, and he's like being threatening towards him, and then he like kills him. That's a really like well acted scene by him, because particularly when he's like strangling Jimmy, that's a very like effective moment because it feels so real. It feels so violent as well, even though he's just strangling him.
The noises that he makes, and the expression that kind of goes onto his face, it feels like a passionate, angry murder. And then the way that they cut it, so they push it because they get the camera and it's so close, and the way that it kind of just lingers. And the strangle takes some time. To be fair, it's not a quick thing. It's also really, really good because a real life strangle takes ages, and it obviously doesn't take as long as a real strangle would. It's considerable, and it shows that there's a real effort, and that it was tiring. And I think that was a really, really well done thing.
But he does great all throughout the film, and he has these like. And especially because, he has a lot of these, monologues, and they never get boring or anything. I think that a weaker actor would have made those monologues get very tiresome, but they never get tiresome at all.
The guy who played Teddy was really great. He's sketchy from the beginning. There's something sketchy about him, just from the way that he's framed. Obviously, he's framed right to left anyway, and he's got that smile that's a bit weird. It doesn't quite reach his eyes, and something is up. You almost let your guard down as he talks to Leonard, because he actually starts pointing in the right direction for the mystery and doing things. And then there's still the kind of way he'll look at Leonard, and he's almost like constantly checking what Leonard can remember and what he can't. That is quite interesting. There always seems to be quite a hesitancy about it. And then once he's checked that, you still can't remember anything, he's much more willing to go on with what he's saying again. And then when it comes round at the end, and it's like, this isn't the first, John G. It's kind of like, that makes a lot of sense. Okay. And he plays that scene really, really well, just coldly going kind of explaining to Leonard that he's not quite who he thinks he is.
I thought that Joe Pantoliano was amazing. I mean, it definitely shows that he has loads of like range as an actor because he was able to, he was able to be kind of sleazy, but he was also able to seem like a genuinely good guy when he needed to as well. Which is kind of weird because when you think about the Teddy character, you could argue that he's not a good guy, but I think that in some scenes he actually manages to seem like a nice guy because it's almost like he's like a corrupt version of a carer, basically.
Yeah, he very much is like a corrupted carer because he does do things that help Leonard's life for long, but he only does them so he can direct them towards the targets that he wants to get rid of.
Well, yeah, well, when you think about it like that, but in the rest of the film, he's trying to get the money, obviously, but he's constantly like following Leonard around and stuff and trying to like constantly like get him to, again, be on the path that he wants him to be on. And some of that you could argue would be safer for Leonard, but some of that would also be more beneficial for him.
Yeah,
I think that the way that Joe plays that role in the same scene, he can switch between those two different things, and he can even embody both of those emotions in just line deliveries. He can seem really smug and sarcastic, but also kind of like there's an underlying good-naturedness behind that. And I think at the end of the film, he does a really amazing job when he's like giving that entire reveal, because it's the most emotional that he gets, and you sort of do see beneath the surface, and you see like that Teddy actually is kind of like a bit despondent about Leonard's situation, despite the fact that he's gladly enabling Leonard to go on this path. He is still kind of sad about it, and he conveys that really, really well. But the one bit that we haven't talked about that I actually think is very complicated is the Natalie character, and that entire part of the film I actually think is one of its most interesting elements.
So her role really changes. Like she seems like quite a friendly ally to Leonard. She seems like better with him than a lot of people are. And then you see her snap at points because she knows that he won't remember it. It's almost like it almost kind of just shows you the abuse that could happen in that kind of situation. It's quite scary.
And it's interesting because that also kind of depends on what order that you view the film in, because if you were to view the film chronologically, it would be like, oh, this is actually kind of a redemption for her. But when you view it backwards, you're kind of like, wow, no, you're a bitch.
It's just a weird difference of experience there, because it's like, she almost becomes a better person, really, if you put it chronologically. But
but if you view it in reverse, it's like, oh, I like you. Oh, wait, no, you're totally self-centered, and But even that changes, I feel, based on the ending, where you find out that Leonard killed her boyfriend. Like once you find that out, you kind of then realize she doesn't know that, but you can tell that that's weighing on her mind all the time. But she just knows that no matter what she says, he's not going to be able to give her a straightforward answer. Like she even asks him, like, do you know what happened to Jimmy? And he says, no, I don't. So she knows from the beginning, but she knows that he's most likely dead and that this guy had something to do with it. So even that kind of gives a bit of sympathy towards a more selfish like action. At the same time, though, like in the bit where she's kind of, I also feel like Natalie was going through the 5 stages of grief as well. It's a very subtle thing, but I think she was going through a few of them. Yeah, because like the 5 stages of grief, it's like denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance, and I feel like she was going through, at the very least, she was going through anger and bargaining in that scene. She was definitely going through that, and I think she reached acceptance. I don't know if she was I think maybe depression. I don't know if she was ever in denial or anything, but but that's kind of an interesting thing that I picked up on, and I managed to make her a very, very sympathetic character, but also a character that you kind of hate as well. Particularly, again, in that scene where she's like basically just goading Leonard into punching her. There's almost something cathartic about Leonard hitting her, even though it's also kind of like no, Leonard, if you do that, then you'll play into her plans. Don't do that. Don't. Come on, keep yourself controlled. Don't do that. Or come on, find a pen, write this down. But that entire sequence is really, it's extremely well acted as well, especially like by Pierce, but by Carrie-Anne Moss as well. She does an amazing job in that scene, especially because it's like in that scene you're just like,
she does brilliantly because she just switches. Like it is like this button.
It's the most hateable that character is throughout the film, and like she seems a bit abrasive but perfectly fine, and then all of a sudden she just like switches, and in that scene she's really like intimidating in that scene as well. She's saying all this like awful stuff to Leonard, and you kind of realize that she just does have the power in that moment.
Yeah, you realize that in that relationship she's got the power. I like that both Teddy and her don't trust the other one, so they're kind of influencing Leonard like that, and Leonard clearly listens to Natalie more.
He ends up at least doing what she wants. But then again, it's like, when she early on in the film, she's only doing the stuff that he said, she just asks, like, he just asked, like, oh, can you find this license plate? And she says, like, yeah, and then she did. That implicates Teddy as well. So that's kind of, and she doesn't know it. She knows who Teddy is, but she doesn't know it. She doesn't know that she's basically picking him. Almost like a weird, like, kind of battle that you're kind of seeing between Leonard's two different, I guess you could say, treacherous advisors.
It almost feels a touch King Learish. Oh, like two people trying to vie for the Mad King who's just not paying attention at all.
Mm-hmm.
And he's consumed with his own rubbish. Quite great, because it's like the angel and the devil on his shoulder, except they're both actually the devil, which you realise later on.
Actually, I wouldn't say that they are either the devil or the angel. I don't think you can really put them into either category. But I guess you could say, like, they switch between angel and devil at certain points, and they can kind of be put in either position depending on your interpretation. Like, you could see Natalie as being worse than Teddy, or Teddy as being worse than Natalie. The way that they handle Leonard's character is really strong as well, because you do realise that you are rooting for a serial killer or a serial vigilante.
It leaves you with this really ambiguous feeling, because on the one hand, he's gotten closure for the brief second. He's never really going to have closure, because it's never really going to last. So it becomes a man who has made himself into a killer by choice.
It's become basically his own worst enemy. Partially what makes him such an interesting protagonist. Again, like, morally complex, because again, you can't place this guy on the binary of good and evil.
No, you can't. Because of Teddy's influence, that he's trying to think that Johnny G is a drug dealer. So you're then looking at, like, the targets of who he might be getting rid of, and you're like, oh, God. On the one hand, I kind of get the impulse, but on the other hand, oh, God, that's wrong. It sets up the conflict in your own morals. So, like, by the time that you get there, you don't know what to think, where to go, and what's going on, which is exactly where they want it.
Last thing I want to touch on, does a really great job at, like, genre blending as well. Like, I think that this movie balances genres very well. Even, like, the genre itself is kind of hard to define. Like, so you're kind of focusing on the noir aspect, and I agree that it's definitely a blend of a lot of things. Crime drama, crime thriller, psychological thriller, even, like, dramatic study of, like, grief.
Well, yeah, no, it is, but noir's more of a mood than a genre. I didn't mean it as a generic thing. It's much more of a mood description. I just get annoyed when it counts as a genre because it's not. But I use it as a term to describe a film when there's, obviously when it fits the noir mood and doesn't fit neatly into several categories, because there's a crime, drama, thriller, mystery kind of thing. And it's just,
I kind of count it as a genre. This film also kind of fits into the category that we call, like, sunny noir as well, because a lot of the movie takes place during the day. Not a lot of it takes place, like, at night or even in, like, black and white, despite the cutaways we have.
It's a daytime thing, but it still fits the conventions, right? And it still uses those shadows, especially on the interior. It also blends, like, old-fashioned cinematic styles with newer ones in the way that it shoots itself.
In between black and white and the comparison between the kind of colour look.
The way that it uses camera work. In the black and white, it emphasises that excessive shadow work that you used to see in the 20s and the 40s a lot more. In the daytime, it will it's pretty much the same teal and blue kind of thing. Teal and orange in terms of the colour palette. I mean, it's slightly more towards the teal blue end, but
some of it actually I saw as being a bit of a test run for what he'd do later with, like, blockbusters as well, particularly in the encounter between him and Dodd, because that's the most action bit of the film. But I also felt that was kind of reminiscent of what he'd later do in, like, Dark Knight trilogy or even Inception. And that chase is actually surprisingly funny as well. There's actually a lot of humorous moments, like probably the most amount in the film come in that sequence. Actually,
I think it's a great sequence as well, because kind of get the idea that we do know what's going on in that situation. At the start, when there's like, oh, I'm chasing this guy, you're like, yeah, I completely buy it. And then it just, sudden role reversal. It's quite funny when he goes, oh, wait, no, he's chasing me. A great little moment.
One thing that kind of is funny given the structure film is, like, so you first see the bit where he's, like, sitting on the toilet and he has, like, the wine bottle. And he's like, oh, I don't feel drunk. And then like, you have the fight between him and Dodd in that motel room. What's funnier as well is that then when you see, like, him actually going into the hotel room and he arms himself, he has this, like, inner monologue line where he says, I've got the drop on you, you fucker. But that's funny given what happens afterwards, where how he totally forgets that he was in a fight. How he totally forgets that he was in a chase, and he actually didn't have the drop on Dodd. Dodd ended up having the drop on him.
It was a good way of doing, like, a chase scene as well, because it just changed up what you expected. It was really subverted it, and it was...
Yeah, it did, and again, it included, like, humorous moments. The funniest one, and this isn't even necessarily because what's happening is funny, it's just because, like, the edit that I thought was hilarious is where he gets pulled over by Dodd, and then Dodd points the gun at him, and then it just cuts to Leonard instantly driving. Like, it doesn't cut to him reacting like, oh my god. It doesn't cut to him like giving a shock reaction and then driving. It just cuts to him driving. Like, his head already turned driving. So it's almost like it creates this symbolic reaction of, hey, what are you doing? Points gun. Nope.
There were quite a few moments of comedy throughout. I think it kind of helped break up the film because it's a very serious film, so it helped to keep the tone a bit fresh, engaging, and again, I think it was a way of using the memory condition to a great extent because there surely would be a time where he would forget what he was doing in the middle of doing it, and the fact that it was so vital added a sense of danger while adding a sense of humour to it as well because it's inherently a bit funny. We forget something like that, but he does.
Illusion, I love it. Again, among his filmography, I personally don't have like a ranking or anything because, because I like them all. It is among his most vital movies that you need to watch. Still holds up after 20 years. It's really engaging. It's interesting. Has great acting. Has great writing and direction. Yeah, totally successful.
I would absolutely recommend the film. It just works. It's a film that just works. It's nice. It's contained. And it also is a great case for why low and mid-budget films should still get made because it epitomizes low and mid-budget. It's a simple story told in a really interesting way, uses its limitations effectively. For me, it's just a great example of what you can do independently. And I think cinema needs more of still.
Movies like this get made like every year, but I think that sometimes they don't really get the same mainstream recognition that this one got.
Yeah, I think it should. They should be almost supported in a similar way that some larger films are, so that it can get that recognition.
Great director's career can get started as well.
Yeah, exactly. Because I think it was the thing that launched Christopher Nolan. This film.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Don't worry, he'd done other films that were good as well around that time, but this one bounced it off, and it's one of his strongest structured films. A really, really good concept for the film. I just think if you are a fan of Christopher Nolan's style, you're going to love it.
Yeah, so the next episode is going to be another single episode. We are going to be discussing another film that came out around like 20 years ago, Almost Famous. So yeah, the way I kind of see it, I see it almost like a reverse Inception, not in terms of story or style or anything like that, but in terms of the fact that both this and Inception kind of have a main character who was a guy who was responsible for their wife's death and is mentally avoiding it. And I kind of see this and Inception as kind of companion pieces, whereas in one film, once he finds out the truth, he rejects it. In Inception, when he finds out the truth, he accepts it. Can you see that comparison?
Yeah, no, I can. It is almost like acceptance of, all right, this is what my life is. It's not going to get better than this, but at least I know this. At least I do this. That to me is what makes it so noir, because he almost traps himself in his own private hell, but he knows that he's going to be free, and it's the only way that he's going to do anything.
There's kind of this crime underbelly to the movie about the whole angle of the Jimmy guy and his associates and stuff, and the money that Leonard still had in his car, and how he's kind of almost a target because he's dressed exactly like Jimmy. And that's not like the main plot or anything, but that it kind of adds to the world. It adds to the very like seedy LA noir stuff.
It's a place that's clearly not very nice. It's a place that it really does encourage just criminality and violence is the way that it's kind of shown up.
Even the hotel owner is perfectly content to basically just take money from Leonard by tricking him into thinking that he's like checked into multiple rooms, or tricking him into thinking that he's checked into one room when he's checked into like more than one room. The motel owners are bad technically.